In this video, we're going to introduce the core framework for small business growth and introduce some of the pieces that will help you as you grow the business and its strategy. Too often, a small business seems somewhat at a loss in terms of where are we taking this to the next step. A lot of times it's because they haven't spent the time or backed up and thought about what is our purpose as a business. What is it that we have asked the employees in terms of giving them a mission or a vision? What core values do we have as a business to grow? A lot of what we try to do is help businesses sit back or stand back and look at those questions, because they have to understand, without giving the employee a vision of where the company's going, how do they know where they're going to get to? And so there's a framework here that needs to be established. We talk about purpose, vision, values a lot. It has to do with setting a clear expectation. Stephen Covey likes to say, begin with the end in mind. You cannot start a business without knowing what it is you're trying to achieve. So begin with that end in mind. What is it you want to achieve as a business? What are the employees' skills and strengths that you want to hire to bring them along? Have you given them that meaningful purpose of what that business will look like if they contribute accordingly? Once you start that framework, it then becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because everything you do needs to relate back to what you've established as a core value for your company, whether it's the way you hire, whether it's the policies you put in place. Think about companies like Apple, for example, where what they've done is built a whole culture, or even Google. A lot of the tech companies have established that here's how we're going to do things, because we feel that this is what we're going to contribute back to society at large. And so they've structured all their policies and programs and onboarding and orientation around that framework. Small businesses are no different. They have to start with that framework. Establish the framework, build yourself the mission, and it doesn't take long to do it. You can do it in less than a day with the right people in the room saying, here's how we're going to get to it. But once you've done that, you have to keep going. You can't just say, okay, we've done it. Let's post it and put it on the walls, sit it in the lunchroom, and I'll talk about it at the next Christmas party. That's not the way to do it. You have to live and breathe it every day. I think the genuine businesses, the owners that we've worked with, understand very clearly that it's not just words on a piece of paper. It's easy to put the words on the paper. It's how do you live them day to day? And so I encourage owners not to just say, well, this worked for that company, I'm going to use those words. Does it make sense for your business? When we spend a day doing this purpose, vision, and values strategy session, a lot of it has to do with, does it make sense? Do you actually live it, or is it just some words that you feel an employee might think sounds great? It's got to be beyond that. It's got to be what the owner originally goes back to their roots. Why did you want to do this business? Yeah, hopefully you're going to be profitable and make some money for everybody involved with it. But what's the purpose behind it? What is the value? What is the product? What is the service that you're getting at? I think you need to know those roots as the business owner before you can do anything else in terms of establishing that framework. Now, the framework goes beyond just purpose, vision, and values. You've got to then surround it with the right policies and the right people that make that vision grow into a reality. I think that's where owners need to focus on, and we build a complete framework, help them try to get that strategy put out there. I like to have a discussion with the ownership group about trust in the business and about accountability. We take them through a lot of different programs, and one of them, for example, is the 5 dysfunctions of a cohesive team. And we try to get them to understand that without trust at the base of the pyramid, you can't have a discussion. You can't talk about the elephants in the room. You can't deal with conflicts. You can't deal with a commitment from the team, and therefore you can never have accountability. And that's really what a lot of businesses are trying to get to, is how do I make sure the workers I have are accountable? There's a bunch of easy frameworks to get them that way. Start with the end in mind. Start with that vision. Then build your team accordingly. Surround yourself with not yes people or people who will just listen and say, yes, I'll go and do that. It's about surrounding yourself with different ideas. In fact, the best people I've ever had work for me are the ones that disagree with me. And I put them on my team because I need that other perspective. If you think with a single frame of thought and then surround yourself with people who that's all they think, you'll never get anywhere as a business. You have to have that divergent or disagreeable sometimes opinion to help you get there. Once you've built this core framework and surrounded the right people with the right skill sets in the business, you are now set up for success. You can now achieve with that end goal in mind. Because without that framework, you have nothing. And you have no motivational tools to help the people you're going to bring on board with you get to that next level. When we talk about a purpose, we also sometimes use the word mission statement. And it basically is a simple sentence which defines what the company is about. We are a company that sells X product to this industry, and we want to be able to achieve a certain amount of category dominance in it. That's a typical purpose or mission statement. We want to do this in this industry and be so large. A typical way of putting it. A vision is more about what is it we're trying to accomplish at the end of the day. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about the brand or about the product or the service. It's about here's what we believe in, right? We believe in a safety culture. That's a vision. For a construction company, as an example, I have one which their number one vision is we want our employees to go home safely at the end of every day. Nothing about what they do, nothing about what they sell. It's just this is our vision. And then the values are the core values they believe in. We want employees who believe in, so safety could be part of it, but who believe in assisting others, who believe in teamwork and collaboration, who understand that rewards come from hard work. There's certain values you can build. The key point, though, is you're able to do these in sometimes a half day or a full day session. And we'll take management teams through this process where we'll start with that purpose or mission. What is it you are trying to do? And then we use certain parameters to help them define it into a very clear, concise statement. And then we'll take from that, we'll have them a quick break, and we'll get right into what is it you want as a vision for your employees? What can your employees hold on to, right? Do I just want to sell the most expensive yoga pants? I don't think so. I want to be able to do more than that. So what is the vision you're giving your employees? And then finally, what values that can they talk about? The values really, to me, are the elements of that elevator speech that I talked about. And they lead directly back to why that person is working for your company. Here's what we believe in. Oh, I happen to have the same values. That's what values are about, tying it together. Yeah, I think once you've spent that time on the purpose and vision, you now have defined or brought in employees that can speak to that culture about it. What have you done to back them up? What are the competencies that you need to look at and measure for every single person? Some of this is tied to the performance. Some of this is tied to job descriptions. A lot of companies these days use what we call job competencies. And so it's not about being able to, push this button 100 times to achieve a goal. It's about a competency, which is I have the ability to think on my feet and make a decision and react. In other words, there's a thinking competency or some kind of skills competencies. And then it's also about measuring behaviors because, We talk in human resources that, you can't measure attitude. You have to measure behaviors and performance. And that's because you're trying to be objective based about the employee, and you're trying to make sure that everything you've written down is a scalable reference to how they can do their job and what levels. Competency is about a tier going from one level of competency to another as you achieve a certain goal, as you achieve a familiarity or experience or an education. Your competency level moves up as you apply it in the workplace. And then the behaviors apply to that because you're also exhibiting how a person should act in their role at their job. In other words, are they a team player? Are they able to exhibit a behavior, or do they show a skill which has leadership abilities so that you can flag that as a potential future leadership skill trait that you might need in this position? I think it's all layered, and I think it's part of that framework. It starts with purpose, vision, and values. It goes into competencies. It goes into the behaviors model, and that whole element is the defining piece for what an employee can provide you in a company. It defines where the company's mission is going, and then it allows the employee to interact with that purpose, and you can build a framework and tie them directly to that original purpose. A skill is tied to a competency in that exhibiting a proficiency in a defined area can be seen as a skill. A behavior is more about the approach you take when dealing with perhaps an individual or a group of people. It's how you set your tone. I talked about Covey earlier, and he talks about principle-centered leadership. How do you lead your life at home? Is it different from how you lead your life at work? If there's a difference between the two, then you're not a genuine or an authentic person. I think behavior stems from that, in that how I define my moral or ethical compass and what I provide at workplace should be the same as what it is in my home or other life. Whereas a skill set is more about achieving a competency in a specific area and being able to prove that you can do something. A behavior is an environmental view, whereas a skill is more defined within that workplace dynamic. Some of the warning signs that I think a lot of management teams and businesses don't see are the people skills that are required to get them to that next level. I think those fence posts are managers and teams that are brought on board, look at the business performance without really measuring the human performance that's required. I think more and more leaders understand these days that the human element is the key element behind it. Some people like to joke that, company would be great if it didn't have any people. But the reality is that's the only way the company is great. And I think management teams need to focus on that people skills part. And I'm not talking about HR skills. I'm talking about being able to relate to people, being able to look at someone and give them proper guidance and performance discussions. Talk to them when things go wrong. Talk to them when things go right, and be able to provide the kudos required. But do it in the framework that supports where the business was coming from with the original purpose and vision. And then as they see those signposts that say, I'm going off, go back and look at those core values again. Have you strayed too far from them? Have you surrounded yourself with a management team that has those right skill sets to help you on the way as well? I think that's the area that people need to focus on in small businesses, is making sure that the management teams have those right skill sets, because that's the reward for the company. If they can grow together, they're better off at the end of the day. I think a lot of it comes down to the performance aspect of it. Are you measuring the right performance needs of the business? It's not just how is that individual performing. It's what is the business requirement? And does that person fit the need of the business? Do they have the right skill sets to help that business grow? If you can't assess the skill set of the individual and be able to provide them with some guidance as to their performance, how can you then tell them what the next step in their career path is? How can you give them the training and development that's going to tie it all together? It's a seamless piece. It starts with you when you brought them on board. It starts with how you provided that purpose for the company. And now you need to tie everything they do back to the performance of the company. A lot of the work we've done in companies involves programs like EOS or Traction. And what's valuable about those programs is that they tie the owner or the CEO of the business down to the person that might sweep the shop floor. And they clearly are able to see how their performance doing what they're supposed to do ties up level by level through their managements to the CEO. That's very powerful. And it's why it's being utilized in a lot of businesses. But we can do that on a scale where you don't have to have a fancy program to do it. You can just tie down what the person's performance looks like, what their goals and expectations are, and then explain to them how they are contributing to the company's top line and bottom line. You have to be able to define it, and you have to be able to measure it, and then you have to be able to communicate it. All three elements are required in order for you to get from one point to the end point. Otherwise, there's no value in doing it. So it must be documented, it must be measured, and it must be communicated. Once you've got the vision and that communication piece in place as to where you want to be at the end of the day, you now need to structure all your human programs around that so that they contribute to it. In fact, one of the audits I've been through recently is we went through this process and looked at performance management, job descriptions, offer letters, compensation programs, and bonuses, and even the training and development that's done, and said, let's get rid of the ones that don't contribute to where we're heading. Yes, they were good for this person. Yes, they're good for that. But the reality is, why are we doing things that don't contribute to where the company is heading? Are they just because we're trying to please somebody or we're making a concession? No, you need to have that framework that says we're doing it because we want to get from X to Y. And to do that, you've got to bring those programs and policies in what I call an alignment with where the company's vision is headed. So it's policies, it's procedures, it's compensation programs, it's variable pay programs. What are the pieces that contribute and get the person's focus back on the business where it needs to be? And so I call it, the rewards programs are a key component of that, but not just the rewards, it's the measurement of the individual's performance. And so being able to make sure managers don't just sit down on an annual basis and talk about performance. We always say if it's a surprise to you at a performance review as to what your manager's saying, the manager failed you, because nothing should be a surprise. You should know going into any performance review session exactly where you stand. And that can only happen if the manager's been having regular conversations with you and not being afraid to perhaps sometimes cause some conflict. We talk about the elephant in the room. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. We don't want to say something that will send them the wrong way. What you have to do is put it in a professional context, because if you don't talk about the elephant in the room or the lack of performance and how it contributes to the company, you've lost your opportunity with that employee. And so very often they become resentful about, well, they didn't tell me I was doing anything bad, so I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm supposed to think I'm doing. I'm not sure, because there's been no clear vision set. There's been no clear core value set. They haven't had their performance set up against that. The manager hasn't been able to bridge the gap as to what they're saying and what they're seeing. And finally, the communication has just been poor. You need to bring all those pieces together. HR evolves over time as a business grows, but it also evolves as the company becomes more complex. The more clearly defined their end goal is from their initial strategy, the quicker you can get your employees aligned to it. But the way to do that is through the right tools. Again, the onboarding process. The most important day of an employee's career is their first day in the company. How you treated them, how you onboarded them. Most employees remember that first day more than any other day of their career. So you have to remember to treat them right the first day they got in. And if their career ends at the end of the day, you have to make sure you treat them the same way you treated them on the first day. So I think it's about giving employees that due respect, but management teams knowing that there's a process and we can help you define that process. And then we can help you put those pieces that support the strategy from you getting from one end to the other. And again, it's part of that human resources life cycle for the employee, being able to structure, here's how your career is going to work, and being able to support them on those different levels. You have to have a management team that trusts each other with it, and you have to have accountability at every level to bring it all together. Performance management system typically is a process of measuring and defining an individual's performance over a defined period of time. Very often, companies' performance reviews are on an annual basis. More often, though, they should be done typically on a quarterly basis. There are some people that believe that performance systems are just every time you talk to your employee, there's an opportunity. And that's certainly one way of looking at it as well. But a performance system at its minimum has to have a description of the person's role and responsibilities. Hopefully that job description is tied to the original purpose and values of the company, and then it's built from there. We're able to take those elements of that job description and then parse it out into specific components of measurement. So here's what they were expected to do on the given day. Do they do it regularly? Do they do it often? Do they do it unfailingly all the time? And be able to measure those little pieces, and that adds up. So those components are very clear. Having a well-defined, clearly written job description is the foundation of any performance management system. And then making sure that the employee has well-communicated goals and expectations. It's one thing to be able to measure the performance. Where I think a lot of companies and small businesses fail is then setting that goal and expectation for the upcoming time period. So goals have to be clearly written. We talk about SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. That's a simple method of setting up a goal or an objective for an employee to follow. Does it meet those criteria? If it doesn't meet the SMART criteria, it's not a proper goal or an objective. And once you have those goals and objectives defined, then you've now set the employee up to be measured for the next time frame and the next time cycle. Performance management is a continuous loop. Unfortunately, too many companies look at it as a step one, end of year, let's do it. Oh, my bonus is based on it. That doesn't get you anywhere other than the person doing what they need to do in the last few weeks to make sure that the manager remembers, oh yeah, they have, they weren't great for most of the year, but they really picked up their socks in the last quarter. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. That's not performance management. We call that the halo effect or the horns effect. I think making managers understand and educate them on, recency biases and halo effects and how what they do on a day-to-day basis contributes to that employee's performance management process is the key part of it. We have to differentiate it, but we also have to say every day is your performance management opportunity. I think rewarding and recognition programs come in sort of two flavors. There's certainly a monetary aspect. You can deal with raises or merit increases. You can deal with bonuses, whether they're discretion or they're based on some kind of formula on the company's financial performances. But there's also the recognition piece where sometimes it's not just a monetary reward. Sometimes it's being able to give that person increased responsibility. That's a great one that I often see companies fail because they think, "Oh, I'm limited in my budget. What can I do?" I said, well, give that person more because they've shown you they can do more. They've proven in their performance that they're ready for more. So let's figure out a way to add more responsibility to them. And yes, they're going to be looking for some compensation to go with that on the eventual basis. But in the meantime, your reward is to say, I'm going to give you more. Maybe it's a promotion. Maybe it's an increase in responsibility. And sometimes it's as simple as making sure that employee has the right words written on the review to indicate that they've gotten to the next level. You can't always in a small business, move out laterally and create this large framework of an org chart. It's very tight. It's very compact. Small businesses need to be able to move somewhat freely and be able to not be bound by a lot of it. And that's why you end up with businesses that typically have a person in multiple roles. It's why we would recommend not trying to, for example, go and hire a dedicated HR person for a small business, but have a person who can do multifunctional roles. That's how they start. Eventually, they'll be able to figure out whether they want to stay in one area or not. But a company has to be able to say, I've got a reward system in place. I can't always give monetary. I can't always give promotions, but there's an opportunity for me to reflect and let that person know, here's how they're contributing to the business. Most small businesses tend to use a discretionary approach to short-term incentive programs or even long-term incentive programs. So whether the company is offering shares or options, or whether they're just offering some kind of phantom stock plan, or whether it's just an annual bonus that's based on some kind of financial metric, they're important because they tie a person's performance to the expectation of where the company's going. And their importance in terms of incentive programs is it's very much on the curve from purpose to end state. And it helps the employee get tied to that all the way through it. The problem, though, with some programs is that most small businesses, as I indicated, tend to use a discretionary approach. In other words, if we make money, we'll give you some money. That's not really much of an incentive. You can hope and you can tie yourself to getting to that number, but if you don't communicate what that number is at the beginning, how can you get there? How can you expect the employee to have any motivation? We try to go in and help companies understand that a discretionary approach may get you through the year one, but now you've got to create an expectation of here's where our goals and financial targets, and here's where your performance tied to it. I like to tie both individual performance and company performance together in a very simple incentives plan structure. I think that way you're able to get the employees buy-in, but at the same time, they're seeing where the company's going. That's a very good statement of how to tie people together to a business. But if you use a discretionary approach, you're losing that opportunity because you don't see where that employee's real contributions will help you. But if you give them the information, then they can do something with it. There are businesses, small family-run businesses, companies that don't want to let that information outside of a very closed group of people. And unfortunately, I think it's the wrong approach. I think while I understand and respect they want to keep that information confidential, if you're going to reward someone with a long-term or short-term incentive, then make sure they can understand how the measurement's happening. Because if you just say, well, we made money, so I'm going to give you a little bit, that doesn't help. But if you say, hey, we hit 95% of our target, therefore I'm going to give you 95% of this overall structure, I think there's a bit more buy-in that, okay, I can see where this is heading. But I think companies typically tend to fail because they keep it close to the vest without giving the employee enough information that they can contribute. I think the more clear you can be with your communication of the goals, and then the expectations of the individual's performance, then you are able to give a proper reward and tie that person directly to it. The more information you give them, the better the result will be at the end of the day from that person. I think once a company's established their purpose and vision and has core values, then they've already started down the path of what I would call creating a compelling brand for their business. There's a lot of great brands out there, and they've created a culture, and that's the key word here, of what they're trying to look for, what their expectation is of that individual. And the companies that stay on brands are the ones that are successful. They're successful in hiring the kind of individual they want to work in that company. I think of a company like Lululemon as an example, where they've stuck with a brand and they hire a certain kind of individual that believes in that brand. It's a very youthful brand, but that's what they want to be able to promote. There's lots of examples of other companies that stick to that core philosophy. How you're able to take that brand and now develop the marketing materials that are required and the stories. I think we forget that culture is the stories we tell about the company we work at. People like to think culture is something very sophisticated and hard to wrap my head around. It's easy. What is it when someone asks you at a party, hey, what do you do or who do you work for? What are the first 30 words out of your mouth? And I think that's what culture is. It's the story you're going to tell. It's that elevator pitch that comes out of your mouth when you're asked the question, what do you do for a living? I like to think it's so simple that if you can craft that simple brand message, the simpler it is, the better off you will be as a business. And it allows employees to believe in that message. If it's truly resonating with them, they'll say the same things. So what do you say when you're asked, what do you do for a living? That's what culture is. That's how companies start with their branding. The word of mouth is a very powerful thing. You know, we see how social media works these days and the power that it's connected with. I think it's the same approach. It's just when you're able to tell that story, you have someone listening on the other side of it who now understands, here's what that elevator pitch said in 30 or 40 words or in 2 minutes. And I just saw the passion behind that person speaking. I think you can't fake that. You can say words, but you can't fake the feeling and you can't fake the passion. I think companies that truly get it are the ones that are looking for that passion, who understand if I have 100 employees, I've got 100 brand representatives. That's how I'm going to build my business. So we take companies and say, what are your employees saying about you? We don't have to go to Indeed and look at results or surveys. What are your employees saying about you? Now, don't get me wrong, an employee engagement survey is very important, but you need to know what it is that that person feels and says, because they're your best brand ambassadors and they're also the best person to convince someone else to join your company. So that logic, that movement from mouth to mouth, it's a communication element. We see it time and time again. Companies have the most success in recruiting when they offer some kind of in-house referral program. Why? Because they've got a person who's saying, hey, I know someone who could be a good person for this place. You don't typically get that if they don't care. If they don't care, they're not going to be that person. So, referral programs are a very strong method of building up that brand awareness, rewarding your employees at the same time for doing that. And most of the companies that I operate with have some kind of referral program, and it usually pays out very well for them. And the employee typically only has to stick around for 6 months or a year in order for that reward to be given out. But it's effective because it condenses that elevator pitch and now lets your employee be the one being your brand ambassador. You're also using this as an opportunity to see, what do they know about your culture, right? Have they done the work? Have they done the research to understand what you're truly about? So the connection they may have had with that referral, hopefully they've gone back and not just said, why do you think this is such a great place? But they truly understood it and have done further research onto it. It's why companies ask those questions in interviews, right? What do you know about us? Right? They truly want to understand, not just, oh, well, you're a Fortune 500. No, they want to know, what do you know about our brand? What do you know about our culture? Those are the questions I ask, because those are important ones to see whether you've got a fit between a potential and where you're trying to take the company. So that internal referral system, that branding, that marketing, that ability to condense what you're saying. Again, it's why I don't believe you need to have, multiple levels of core values. You need to find a few and stick with them, and then lather, rinse, repeat them with your employee base all the time. At the end of the day, if you've got a meaningful purpose, vision, and core value set, and your employees have defined competencies and behaviors that will make them successful in your business, that is the key elements of the framework of how you set yourself up for success. It defines how you will approach your marketplace, and it defines your employees' approach to how they talk with others about the work that they do. So there's two elements that are brought together in that. Recently, we did work with a company in Southern Alberta that was a new entity and brought us in to do exactly this work. We defined how, over a one-day period, their overall goals, purposes, objectives, visions, and values. And then from that, we were able to then go right into building job descriptions and core competencies for their defined management roles. Their next goal, as I speak right now, is they're now taking that and doing it for every employee in the company. We've also then built a framework for a performance management system tied to those goals, tied to those values, that will reward employees, in this case on an annual basis, not based on some discretionary what-if number, but on a defined plan, on defined financial metrics, and defined individual performance. That's a great example of how you can build in a small company of 30 employees, starting with their purpose and then ending with a reward for all employees. This is a company that is brand new in its inception, and the first year has already achieved a 15% profitability margin. We divested them from another company. I was the principal HR person in that other company, providing strategic advice. And so as we did the divestiture, they didn't know me at all, but they saw the work that I was doing in trying to make this all happen in a very, strategic, simple, checklist approached way. And then they turned around and said, we need this help as we're going into our first year. Can you provide us some advice? Can you help us with our strategy? They took a bit of a leap of faith, but the reality was our proven track record at their former parent company led them to bring us on board to actually work with them in this capacity. And I'll be doing my second strategy session with them next month. Companies can't avoid the problems that they may occur on a day-to-day basis. You deal with them, you have issues, you solve them. A lot of times companies don't put a proper emphasis on the people attributes that they need to help them get there. Too often one person or a sole owner is trying to get that place fixed in only the way they know how. If you bring in the right specialty to help you with that, the right framework, and then set up your company based on a purpose, based on a vision, then tie employees to that, and then build them out with performance and development. It is a winning formula. It is proven every time. If you take the time to invest in your people and into the processes that support your people, you will have a successful business. We've shown you the importance of the structure and the importance of the leadership and management team in the development of that structure. In the next video, we're going to spend some time and show you how it's important to spend time on the ROI of leadership development. See you in the next video.